Question is that the bill be now read a second time. Mr. Liang and Hua.
Mr. Speaker, this GST bill comes at a time when we are facing rising global inflation and heightened economic uncertainties. The effects of the war in Ukraine and the never-ending pandemic have led to rising energy and food prices, among others, and which are now being felt at all households and businesses. Singaporeans are feeling the strain, with many household essential items like electricity bill, grocery at the supermarket, food at the hawker center and coffee shops rising sharply. The low to middle incomes and the retirees are particularly impacted as they do not have the higher wages or savings to offset the cost increases. So the question then is whether should we go ahead with the GST increase at the current time? And to answer these questions, we need to go back to the fundamentals. Why do we need to raise GST in the first place? The government has explained that our expenditures are rising, and in the decades ahead, we will need to spend even more. Our population is rapidly aging, and along with it comes with the rising healthcare needs. And I've seen that firsthand in my constituency, Bukit Panjang, where the demand for healthcare and senior care facility has risen. We have recently opened a polyclinic at our town, and it has been full house since the day one of opening. And there are increasing demand for places for more senior cares, dialysis centers, rehabilitation centers. They're always queued there waiting, which we intend to further expand our capacity in the coming years. These are all necessary expenditures. If we postpone them, then we will not be doing right for our seniors, who could be our parents, our grandparents of today and the future. Besides aging and healthcare-related spending, we will also need more funding for capacity building, climate mitigations, energy resilience, securities, education, childcare, and the various social and employment support that we want to do more. So there's no dispute on the need for higher spending, and hence the need for higher revenue to fund these escalating expenditures. So the main difference between the government and the opposition position is how this additional revenue should be raised. The government believes that a major bulk of our recurrent expenditure should be funded by recurrent revenues so that our fiscal finances are on a sustainable footing. Every year, the government draws revenues from a diversified source of taxes to pay for our current expenditures, with corporate tax, personal income taxes among the top contributors at 18.3% and 13.6% of total revenues, respectively. Property taxes, which tends to be cyclically driven, is expected to contribute about $2 billion in FY 22-23. The GST contributed about 12.2%, or $12.8 billion, our third largest revenue contributor, while the NIRC at 18.7% is now the largest revenue contributor to balance our budget. The government do review our tax rates from time to time and adjust them as appropriate. So in recent years, due to higher funding needs, the government has indeed been raising tax rates. In budget 2022 this year, income tax and wealth taxes, including property and vehicle taxes, were raised. The government has also increased the stamp duties and the ABSDs, which is another form of wealth tax, besides using it to cool as a tool to cool the market. So this is the government's approach, which is to build a diversified stream of revenue that is stable and sustainable to pay for our current and longer-term spending commitments. GST is one stream of revenue that adds to the diversifications, and where in our unique system, we actually take in more taxes from the wealthier group through GST, those with higher purchasing power, and at the same time mitigate the impact to the lower income or no income Singaporeans. So this is the government's approach. The Workers' Party disagree, saying that the current cost of living and inflation is high, so we shouldn't add further to the cost, and that GST is regressive and it hurts the middle and low income, and that there are other alternate sources of revenues. So in their recent Hammer article, they say that there are 4 alternatives to raising GST. Firstly, to raise NIRC from 50% to 60%. Secondly, to use a portion of the land sales for recurrent expenditures and raise property taxes for more expensive properties. Thirdly, to increase corporate tax revenue from the compliance with BEPS 2. And then fourthly, to raise other taxes like carbon tax and sin taxes. In the article, they even say that with the amount we can get from any of these four will produce the same amount of revenue annually as a 2% GST increase. Therefore, just do any one of these, and there's no need to raise GST. So is this really the case? So what does the government say? Looking at the previous debate and what the government has been doing, this is what I see. Firstly, the government acknowledged that inflation is indeed high and that the costs have been increasing. The government understands that the GST will add to costs. But at the same time, the government would have to make sure that we have the stable base of revenue that can cover our long-term recurring expenditures, especially healthcare, as our population ages rapidly over the next few years. So the government's strategy is to strengthen our revenue sources, which also includes increasing GST's rate, but balance this with a two-pronged approach to cushion the middle income, the low income, the retirees against both cost of living and GST increase. For cost of living, there are support packages. Earlier in the year, DPM Wong said that if there was a need to do more, the government would do more. And this year, I saw how the government had made good on this commitment. So we have a $560 million package in the budget, household support package in budget 2022. And then there was an additional $1.5 billion package in June. And more recently, another $1.5 billion package in October to help Singaporeans cope with the cost of living. So there's a total of $3.5 billion targeted support. On GST, to help with the GST increase, the government has another set of support measures, which is the assurance package that was announced and has since been enlarged to $6.64 billion. The assurance package effectively delayed the GST increase by 5 years for the majority and 10 years for the lower income. There's also the enhanced permanent GST voucher, separate from the assurance package, with additional cash payouts. And this is not a temporary scheme. It is actually permanent. So separately, the government will also absorb the additional GST on publicly funded healthcare and education. And then the government will do the GST increase in two steps, 1% over 2 years rather than one step or 2% this year. So the GST offset support has been in existence for about 15 years. And it has very much been a permanent feature in our GST system to help neutralize the impact of GST to lower income Singaporeans. The offsets focus rightly on the essentials like utilities, SNCC, MediSave, and the cash component as well. So on the ground, I've seen this being very helpful to reduce the cost impact of GST to low and middle income Singaporeans, especially the seniors. So this is the uniqueness of our GST system, where the low income groups are largely offsetted, while we raise a larger proportion of the GST from the higher spending group, which tends to be the wealthier, the high income, and also include the foreign visitors here. So these two approaches are designed to cushion the middle income, the lower income, and retirees against both cost of living and the GST increase. This tells us that we can be assured of support to get through this tough time, and that those who need more help will get more. At the same time, we can be assured that when we get older, we also get the healthcare and other support because we will have a diversified and more stable source of revenue to pay for our various spending programs. So what about the Workers' Party 4 alternative sources? I believe this was debated in the budget debate earlier this year, and I found DPM Wong's round-up speech very helpful in understanding why there are reservations about or doubts about the Workers' Party's proposal. Firstly, on raising NIRC from 50% to 60%. What that means basically is that we will put less back into the reserves. And it also means that there will be less for our young people when they get older. And to dive a little bit more, based on the budget 2022 NIRC estimates of $21.5 billion, reducing the retained NIRC to 40% will mean that more than $4 billion will not be going to past reserves for reinvesting. This will reduce the NIRC that we can generate for subsequent years, including next year. And the cumulative impact over time will be even more significant. Our NIRC has grown from $7.6 billion in 2012 to $21.5 billion this year based on budget 2022 estimates, about threefold increase in 10 years. We hope that NIRC can continue to contribute more, not by changing the ratio, but by growing this base amount of our reserves. If we have not saved enough in the past, the NIRC today would be even lower and will end up needing higher taxes, or we may have to cut spendings or subsidies. Surely we want these NIRC annuities to keep growing, to fund more spending, and to reduce the tax burden for Singaporeans. The Workers' Party also mentioned about land sales, which was earlier dealt with at the PQ, as well as the earlier PQ, both answered by Minister Indrani. So I will not talk about that, except to just mention about the property tax that the Workers' Party mentioned for expensive properties. The government has already made some moves this year, in this year's budget, for the non-owner occupied residential properties. It was raised from a 10 to 20% range to a 12 to 36% range, so a significant increase there. But the point is whether just raising property tax from just the high-end properties will be enough, unless we raise it so high that it's untenable. And if we want to keep it tenable, then we may have to increase the taxes on other owners occupied properties, which will impact the middle-income household and the HDB owners. So don't get me wrong, we're not in a disagreement about increasing property taxes. There can be another source, but the question is at what rate and how much can you raise to? On corporate tax, it was also mentioned that there will be increased corporate tax revenue due to the BEPS Pillar 2. Well, the matter is still not settled. Maybe yes, maybe not. At this point in time, there's no visibility on the actual figures. More importantly, it does not take into account the potential outflows from BEPS Pillar 1, because there's a Pillar 1 and a Pillar 2. So there's no certainty that the revenue from Pillar 2 will be what the Workers' Party has produced in the calculations, as we cannot assume that the companies will not shift their operations in response to the tax rate increases. But having said that, I do not disagree that corporate tax should be another source of additional revenue and that the government should tap on, as we do need all the revenue that we can get to fund a long list of our future spending needs, like I said, the economic capabilities building, transport, childcare, unemployment support, and others. We need more funding, and if corporate tax can be another source, why not? The key balancing consideration is whether the increase in corporate tax rate will compromise on our competitive position, and which would have direct implications on jobs and other opportunities. On carbon tax and sin taxes, we are already tapping on these sources, and in my view, there could be more upside. On carbon tax, the question is how high and how fast that we can increase. Can the businesses withstand it, and how much will be passed on to consumer, especially the higher? We know that higher carbon tax could mean higher household electricity bills. So there's a carbon tax debate coming up, and I'll look forward to hearing the Workers' Party's proposal on the carbon tax rate. On the sin taxes, we can raise more. Perhaps good to hear also on how high should we raise the tobacco tax rates to help fund, to make up for the GST 2%. So I have been scrutinizing the government's fiscal management for many years, and I have also looked at the Workers' Party's current proposal, which, like I said earlier, there are some aspects that I don't disagree. But when I look at all things in totality, I still prefer the government's approach, which is that we continually build a diversified and stable source of revenue with income tax, corporate tax, wealth tax, property tax, GST, and others, and augment with the NIRC that we have to meet our current and longer-term spending commitments. Continue to grow our reserve, as it is our only backstop for our survivability. Growing our reserve will also help increase NIRC, which will reduce the overall tax burdens even as we plan to spend exponentially more in the future. For a tiny country with no natural resources, we need an even higher factor of safety to navigate through the troubled and more uncertain world that we are in today. Being prudent in our finances has never failed us in our history. It has strengthened us. In the horizon ahead, we need this added strength where we must be prepared for more and even bigger external shocks to come. This Parliament must be about doing the right thing, and the right thing for us to do today is to secure our finances in a responsible way so that we can really take care and look after the different group of Singaporeans, those who are growing older, the families who support them, the middle income, the lower income, the retirees, the young Singaporeans, and the future generations. So I support the bill.